Marco, what is going on here? Who is this girl? My voice wavered between a whisper and a scream as I stood frozen in the doorway of our apartment. My apartment. The sight before me was like a dagger through my chest. There he was, sitting on the couch with another woman, her hand resting far too comfortably on his thigh. My stomach churned, my heartbeat pounding against my ribs as if it were trying to break free. Marco turned to me, his expression first of shock, then irritation, like I was the one interrupting something. The woman beside him glanced between us, her perfectly manicured fingers retracting slightly. I took a step inside, barely aware that my suitcase was still in my grip, my fingers clenched so tightly around the handle that my knuckles were turning white. He started, then ran a hand through his hair, his usual tell when he was trying to think up a lie. I threw my bag aside, the heavy thud echoing through the room. Don't you dare, Marco. I came back early to surprise you, and this... I gestured at the scene before me, my breath hitching. This is what I walk into? His lips parted, searching for words, excuses. I could see the gears turning in his head, calculating, gauging my reaction, deciding whether he should deny, manipulate, or pretend. She's just a friend, he finally said, his voice far too casual, as if I were being ridiculous for reacting like this. I let out a short, humorless laugh. A friend? You let your friends touch you like that? Sit this close to you? My eyes flickered to the girl, who now looked distinctly uncomfortable, shifting in her seat. Marco sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. You're overreacting. That was it. That was all he had to say. Like I was the one seeing things, like I had no right to feel this storm rising inside me. Overreacting? My voice cracked, my body trembling from the sheer force of holding back my emotions. I have spent the last 3 weeks working myself to exhaustion, flying back early just to see you. And this is what I come home to? And now you're telling me I'm overreacting? His jaw tightened. It's not like that. You're twisting it. I scoffed. Am I? Then tell me, Marco, what exactly is it like? The woman beside him finally stood, smoothing down her dress. I should go, she muttered, clearly uncomfortable. I turned to her, something dark rising inside me. No, you stay. My voice was eerily calm now. I want to hear what he has to say while you're still here. She hesitated, but Marco waved a dismissive hand. Fine, just go, he muttered, not even sparing her a glance. As soon as the door shut behind her, I turned back to him, crossing my arms. Well, I'm waiting. He exhaled sharply, standing up and rubbing his face like this entire situation was my fault, like I was the one being irrational. Look, he said, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. I made a mistake. A mistake. A mistake. My stomach clenched, bile rising in my throat. A mistake? My voice cracked, my chest burning. Cheating on me is a mistake? Lying to me is a mistake? His face twisted in frustration. It didn't mean anything. I let out a breathless laugh, shaking my head in disbelief. Oh, that makes it so much better, Marco. My voice dripped with sarcasm, but beneath it, there was something else, something raw, broken. Do you even hear yourself? I didn't plan for this to happen, he insisted, stepping closer. I stepped back. I still care about you. I flinched. Care about me? My voice dropped to a whisper, dangerously close to breaking. Then why? Why do this? He ran a hand through his hair again, his jaw tightening. And then, just like that, the mask slipped. Because, honestly? He let out a short, dry chuckle. You're too much work sometimes. You're always busy, always focused on your career, your image. What about me? His voice grew louder, sharper. You left for 3 weeks. Do you even know how exhausting it is to be with someone who's constantly in the spotlight, who gets all the attention, all the admiration? The air was sucked from my lungs. I stared at him, my heart pounding, but for an entirely different reason now. "You..." My voice wavered. "You were using me?" He didn't deny it. His silence was an answer sharper than any knife, and then, as if to drive the blade deeper, he smirked. "You already made me famous," he said with a shrug. "I don't need you anymore." The room spun. For a moment, all I could hear was the deafening ringing in my ears. My hands trembled, my chest tightening until I felt like I couldn't breathe. And then, just like that, the dam broke. I lunged forward, my hands shoving him with all the force I had left in me. He stumbled back, caught off guard, but I didn't care. "You bastard!" My voice was raw, filled with something feral. "I gave you everything. I loved you. I trusted you." He steadied himself, his smirk still in place. "Yeah, well," he said, brushing imaginary dust off his shirt. "Guess you shouldn't have." I inhaled sharply. That was it. That was the moment something inside me snapped. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not for him. Not anymore. I straightened my spine, my hands clenched into fists. "Get out!" My voice was ice, steady, resolute. He rolled his eyes. "Oh, come on!" "Out." Something in my expression must have told him I wasn't playing around. He scoffed, but grabbed his jacket. "Fine. Whatever. You'll regret this." I laughed, a hollow, empty sound. "No, Marco. You will." The door slammed shut behind him, and for the first time in a long, long time, there was silence. I always knew that success came at a price. Long hours, exhaustion, constant scrutiny. The world saw the glamorous side, the magazine covers, the runway shows, the designer dresses that seemed to melt onto my body as I walked under the blinding lights. But behind the curtain, behind the perfectly curated images, there was nothing but relentless work. I had built my career from the ground up. No shortcuts, no wealthy family connections, just persistence, discipline, and an unshakable belief that I could make it. From the moment I was scouted at 18, I poured every ounce of myself into my craft. Castings, fittings, late-night shoots, early morning flights. There was no room for hesitation, no space for doubt. I worked harder than anyone else because I had to. And then, one evening, in the backstage chaos of a high-energy fashion show, I met him. Marco wasn't supposed to stand out to me. He was just another figure in the whirlwind of people surrounding me. Designers, photographers, assistants, models. But something about him caught my attention. Maybe it was the way he carried himself, with a quiet confidence that wasn't overbearing. Maybe it was his eyes, sharp, observant, as if he saw more than just a model walking down the runway. Or maybe it was the way he smiled when he introduced himself, not as some big-shot executive, but simply as Marco, the owner of a small but promising clothing brand. At the time, I had no reason to be particularly interested. My life was already overflowing with commitments, my schedule booked months in advance. But when he reached out after the show proposing a small collaboration, a photo shoot for his upcoming collection, I agreed. I told myself it was just business, that I was helping a young designer gain exposure. But deep down, I knew it was something more. The first shoot was simple, intimate, a minimalist concept, soft lighting, nothing too extravagant. He was there the entire time, watching, directing, adjusting tiny details with a focus that was almost endearing. I was used to working with massive teams, designers who barely glanced at their own projects once they were in motion. But Marco? He cared. He was involved. After the shoot, we talked. Not just about fashion, but about everything. About art, about ambition, about the pressures of success. He wasn't intimidated by me, nor was he overly fascinated. He treated me like a person, not a pedestal to be admired or a tool to be used. One collaboration turned into another, then another, and slowly, without me even realizing it, he became a part of my world. We started spending time together outside of work, casual at first. Coffee after a meeting, a late-night call to discuss an idea for a campaign, then dinner that wasn't about business, a walk through the city when neither of us wanted to go home just yet. Before I knew it, he had slipped past my defenses. I wasn't the kind of person who let people in easily. My career had taught me to be cautious, to keep my walls high. But Marco, he had a way of making me feel safe. He understood the pressure, the exhaustion, the constant battle between ambition and personal life. And for the first time in years, I felt like I had someone who truly saw me. We became inseparable. He wasn't just my boyfriend. He was my collaborator, my creative partner, my escape from the chaos. We worked on projects together, blending my reach with his designs, growing side by side. He made me feel like we were building something, like we were a team. And I loved him for that. I loved the way he looked at me when I walked into a room, like I was the only person who mattered. I loved the way he spoke about his work, how passionate he was, how he wanted to create something meaningful, not just another forgettable brand. I loved how he made time for me, even when we were both overwhelmed, how he reminded me to slow down, to breathe, to enjoy the little moments in between the madness. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to believe in something beyond my career. I allowed myself to believe in us, and I had no idea how much I would come to regret it. I sat in silence, staring at the empty space where he had stood just minutes ago. My whole body felt numb, as if my brain was struggling to process what had just happened. The weight of his words still hung in the air, suffocating, heavy. "You already made me famous. I don't need you anymore." The betrayal should have been obvious, shouldn't it? The signs, the subtle shifts in his behavior. Why didn't I see them? Or did I? Maybe I just didn't want to. I had spent so long believing in him, in us. He had become a part of my life in ways I never imagined letting someone in. I had let my guard down, let myself trust, let myself love. And in the end, it had all been a game to him. A calculated move, a strategy. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. How could I have been so blind? A bitter laugh escaped my lips. No, it wasn't blindness. It was faith. I had wanted to believe in him. I had chosen to trust him despite the whispers that now echoed in my mind, the warnings I had brushed aside so carelessly. And suddenly, like pieces of a puzzle I had ignored for too long, memories started surfacing. "Are you sure about him?" It was Clara who had first said it months ago. We were having dinner at my place, wine glasses half full, the city lights spilling through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She had leaned forward slightly, her expression careful, but there was something in her eyes, hesitation, concern. "He's ambitious, sure, but there's something about him. I don't know. He always seems so focused on your career, on the connections you have. Like, don't get me wrong, he's charming, but I can't shake the feeling that he's more interested in what you can do for him." I had laughed back then, shaking my head. "Clara, that's ridiculous. We work together. Of course he's interested in my career, but that doesn't mean he's using me." She had sighed, taking a sip of her wine. "I just don't want you to get hurt." I had dismissed it. I had trusted him, and Clara hadn't been the only one. "Be careful with that one," Olivia had murmured once at an industry event. Marco had been across the room, talking animatedly with someone I vaguely recognized from a major fashion house. He was always making connections, always networking. At the time, I admired that about him. "Why?" I had asked, raising an eyebrow. She had shrugged. "I don't know, just something about him feels off, like he's always calculating something." I had rolled my eyes. I thought they were just being overprotective. And then there was that one conversation with Lila, the one I had completely erased from my memory until now. "You know he's been talking about his brand a lot more lately, right?" She had mentioned casually while we were getting ready for an awards event. "Like before you, I barely even heard of him. Now he's getting invites to all these exclusive shows, doing interviews, collaborating with major designers. Just saying, you've been really generous with helping him get exposure." "Of course I have," I had said, smoothing down my dress. "We're a team. That's what you do for someone you love." Lila had only hummed in response, her gaze unreadable. And now here I was, alone, humiliated, used. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was the fact that deep down I had been warned. The people who knew me best had seen it before I ever could, but I had refused to listen. I had defended him, convinced that what we had was real. I had fought for him, for us, without ever realizing that he had never been fighting for me. I pressed my hands against my temples, trying to steady my thoughts. But the memories wouldn't stop, wouldn't let me breathe. How many times had I caught him glancing at my phone when I received messages from high-profile contacts? How many times had he subtly steered our conversations toward events, projects, partnerships? How many times had I mistaken his interest in my world for interest in me? A wave of nausea hit me. It had always been about him, about his climb, his ambitions, and I had been nothing more than a stepping stone. Tears burned at the back of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not for him, not anymore. I had given him my love, my trust, my time, and in return, he had taken what he needed and discarded me the moment I was no longer necessary. I exhaled shakily. No more blaming myself. No more questioning what I could have done differently. I wasn't the one who failed. He was. And one day, he would realize exactly what he had lost. I lost track of time. Days blurred together, melting into endless hours of nothingness. The silence in my apartment was suffocating, but I couldn't bring myself to break it. My phone remained untouched on the nightstand, vibrating occasionally with messages I refused to read. Work? I didn't care. Deadlines? Let them pass. People? They would move on. I had spent years building my career, pushing myself beyond my limits, and now, I didn't even have the energy to step outside. The thought of putting on makeup, of dressing up, of smiling for the cameras, it made me feel sick. The idea of facing people, pretending like I was fine, pretending like my life wasn't crumbling beneath me. Impossible. So, I disappeared. For 2 weeks, I let the world spin without me. No calls, no emails, no texts. If my agency was trying to reach me, I wouldn't know. I didn't care. Until today. A loud knock on my door shattered the silence, making me flinch. At first, I ignored it. Maybe if I stayed still, whoever it was would go away. Another knock, louder this time, and then a voice. "I know you're in there." I froze. The voice wasn't familiar, but it wasn't aggressive either. Calm, controlled, male. "I'm not leaving until you open this door," he continued, sounding entirely too sure of himself. "So you might as well save us both some time." Annoyance flickered through me, but more than that, curiosity. Slowly, I dragged myself out of bed, feeling the stiffness in my limbs from spending too much time curled up in the same position. My reflection in the hallway mirror was barely recognizable. Messy hair, tired eyes, a face that had once been on billboards now looking utterly lifeless. Another knock. Sighing, I unlocked the door and pulled it open just enough to see who had disrupted my self-imposed isolation. A man stood there, dressed sharply but not overly formal, dark slacks, a fitted dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He was young, probably around my age, but there was something about him that felt composed, mature beyond his years. His dark eyes assessed me quickly, taking in my disheveled state, but he didn't react. "Good," he said, as if he had won some silent battle by getting me to open the door. "You are alive." I frowned. "Who the hell are you?" He gave me a small, knowing smile. "Liam Carter, assistant to your boss. Well, technically, assistant to the head of your agency, but close enough." I blinked. "The agency sent you?" "More like ordered me to check on you," he corrected, leaning against the doorframe like he had all the time in the world. "Your boss is worried. Your clients are restless. The agency is losing money, and most importantly, you are sabotaging your own career." I let out a sharp breath, gripping the edge of the door. "I don't care." Liam raised an eyebrow. "That's a lie." My fingers tightened. "You don't know me." "No," he admitted easily, "but I know your type." I scoffed. "Oh, my type? Do enlighten me." He crossed his arms, regarding me with a quiet confidence that made my skin prickle. "You're someone who worked too hard to get where you are. Someone who sacrificed too much to let it all go this easily. You're not the kind of person who quits. You're just exhausted. And right now, you think disappearing is the solution." His words hit too close. I hated that he wasn't entirely wrong. I looked away, my voice colder than I intended. "If I needed a lecture, I would have answered my phone." Liam let out a small chuckle, but there was no amusement in his eyes. "Fair enough, but the thing is, you didn't. So now I'm here." I sighed, rubbing my temple. "Why do you even care? The agency can replace me." "They don't want to replace you," he said simply. "They want to help you. But if you don't get back to work soon, that decision won't be in your hands anymore." My stomach twisted. Deep down, I knew he was right. The industry wasn't kind. It never waited. No matter how much I had given, how much I had achieved, the moment I stopped, there were 100 others ready to take my place. But the thought of returning, of smiling, of pretending— "I can't," I whispered before I could stop myself. Liam studied me for a moment, and for the first time his expression softened. "I read about what happened," he admitted. "It's all over the media. Him, you, the scandal. Must be hell." I tensed. Of course it was everywhere. My downfall, my humiliation, my pain, served on a silver platter for public entertainment. "I don't care what people think," I lied. Liam smirked. Another lie. I exhaled sharply, stepping back. "Listen, thanks for checking in or whatever, but I don't need your pity." "I'm not here to pity you." His voice was firm. "I'm here to remind you that you have a choice." I hesitated. "You can stay in this apartment, drowning in misery, letting one man's betrayal destroy everything you've worked for," he said, his dark eyes locked onto mine. "Or you can pull yourself together, get back up, and show the world why you became you in the first place." Silence stretched between us. Then he took a step back, glancing at his watch. "Your boss gave me strict orders to make sure you're okay. I've done that. The rest? That's up to you." I watched as he turned to leave, but before he could step away, I found myself speaking. "What happens if I don't come back?" Liam paused, then looked over his shoulder. "The agency will have no choice but to cut ties," he said honestly. "It won't be personal, just business." A bitter laugh escaped me. Just business. How many times had I heard that phrase in my career? "Right," I muttered. "Figures." Liam hesitated, then sighed. "Look, take a day. Hell, take 2. But after that, show up." I swallowed hard. "And if I don't?" His lips curved into something between a smirk and a challenge. "Then I'll just have to come back and drag you out myself." With that, he walked away, leaving me standing there, torn between frustration, exhaustion, and the smallest flicker of something else. Hope. The return to work was brutal. I had spent 2 weeks hiding from the world, and now the world was making up for lost time. Castings, fittings, runway rehearsals, endless photo shoots, each day blurred into the next, a relentless cycle of movement, lights, and expectations. My schedule was tighter than ever, packed with back-to-back flights, early call times, and barely any room to breathe. The cameras still loved me. The designers still wanted me. The public still followed my every move. On the surface, it seemed like I had slipped back into my life effortlessly, as if nothing had changed. But it had. I could feel it in the way my body moved, slower, heavier, even when I forced myself to smile. I could feel it in the exhaustion that clung to me, deeper than just a lack of sleep. And worst of all, I could feel it in the emptiness that lingered no matter how many sets I stepped onto, no matter how many outfits I changed into. I was working, I was moving, but I wasn't living. Still, I pushed through. What else could I do? And through it all, Liam kept showing up. At first, I thought nothing of it. He was the assistant to my boss. It made sense that he would check in, make sure I was keeping up with my schedule, relay messages from the agency. He would stop by after shoots, send quick messages asking if I needed anything before my next flight, casually remind me of upcoming meetings. It was professional, or at least that's what I thought. It wasn't until a late-night fitting, after hours of standing in heels and being pinned into a dress that didn't fit quite right, that I realized something was different. I was drained, sitting in the back of the studio, rubbing my temples when Liam appeared beside me, 2 coffee cups in hand. "Thought you could use this," he said, holding one out to me. I blinked at him. "Did my boss send you?" Liam tilted his head slightly, his usual smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "No." I frowned, taking the cup hesitantly. "Then why are you here?" There was a pause, not awkward, but thoughtful. "Because I wanted to check on you." His voice was quieter than usual, lacking its usual teasing edge. For the first time, I saw something else beneath his carefully controlled exterior, genuine concern. I studied him, suddenly unsure of what to say. "You're my responsibility, technically," he added, almost like an afterthought. "But even if you weren't, I'd still be here." Something in my chest tightened. I looked down at the coffee in my hands, fingers wrapping around the warmth. "Why?" Liam exhaled, leaning against the wall beside me. "Because I know what it's like to act fine when you're not." I glanced up at him sharply, surprised by his honesty. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The studio was quiet, the designers and assistants finishing up for the night, leaving us in this little pocket of stillness. "I thought you were just keeping an eye on me because of orders from above," I admitted. He shook his head, lips curving into a small smile. "I mean, technically, that's how it started. But..." He hesitated, then shrugged. "I don't know. I guess I just..." He stopped himself, running a hand through his hair. "You don't have to do this alone, you know." His words caught me off guard. I had spent so long convincing myself that I did have to do this alone, that nobody would understand, that leaning on someone would make me weak. But here was Liam, standing beside me, offering... what exactly? Friendship, support, and why did I feel like I wanted to accept it? A strange warmth settled in my chest, something I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't overwhelming, wasn't intrusive. It was just... nice. I found myself speaking before I could think too hard about it. "I wouldn't mind talking more, outside of all this work stuff." Liam raised an eyebrow, amused. "Are you saying you like my company?" I rolled my eyes, but a small smile tugged at my lips. "I'm saying you don't annoy me as much as I thought you would." He laughed, shaking his head. "I'll take it." And for the first time in weeks, I felt lighter. Weeks passed, and somehow, without me fully realizing it, Liam became a constant presence in my life. It started subtly, small check-ins after my shoots, casual conversations between fittings, the occasional coffee run when he happened to be in the area. But over time, those moments stretched longer. A late-night text joking about a disaster at work. A shared glance across a crowded room when something ridiculous happened at an event. A quiet conversation on the phone when I was too exhausted to pretend everything was fine. He didn't push. He didn't demand. He was just there. And I found myself relying on that presence more than I wanted to admit. At first, I told myself it was just convenience. He was easy to talk to, and I didn't have the energy to maintain superficial conversations with anyone else. But it was more than that. He made me feel normal. Like I wasn't just some industry product, a face on a billboard, a name on a contract. He spoke to me like a person, and maybe that's why I let my guard slip. It happened one evening after a long day of castings. I was exhausted, drained from smiling, posing, performing. Liam had met me outside the building, walking with me toward my car like he always did when we finished at the same time. Something about the way he spoke that night, easy, light, teasing, made me forget, just for a moment, about everything weighing on me. And without thinking, I let a small smirk cross my lips and said, "Careful, Carter. If you keep treating me this well, I might start thinking you like me." It was nothing, a harmless tease, a moment of levity. But the second the words left my mouth, something shifted. Liam blinked, his expression unreadable. A slow smirk tugged at the corner of his lips, but his eyes, they were different, curious, searching. "Would that be such a bad thing?" he asked, voice low, effortless. I laughed it off, brushing it aside, and he let me. But later that night, lying in my bed, the moment replayed in my head over and over again. And with it came the fear. What am I doing? The thought struck hard, twisting deep in my gut. What was I doing? I had sworn to myself that I wouldn't let anyone in again, that I wouldn't be stupid. And yet here I was, sharing moments, inside jokes, trusting someone again. Hadn't I learned my lesson? I had thought Marco was genuine too. I had thought he cared. And yet, when it came down to it, he had only been after one thing. What I could give him. My status, my reputation, my influence. What if Liam was the same? What if, beneath the easy charm and steady presence, he was just waiting for the right moment to take what he wanted? And even if he wasn't, what if I let him in, only to end up right back where I started? Alone, humiliated, used. My mind spiraled, doubts flooding in, twisting every interaction into something dangerous. Had I already made a mistake? Should I pull back now before it was too late? But then, I thought about how patient he had been, how he never pushed, never asked for anything in return, how he had seen me at my lowest, my most vulnerable, and instead of taking advantage, he had just stayed. Would Marco have done that? No. Would someone who only wanted to use me have done that? No. And yet the fear didn't disappear. It clung to me, whispering warnings, reminding me of every mistake, every betrayal, every time I had given too much and been left with nothing. I hated that fear. I hated that Marco had taken something from me beyond just my trust. He had taken my ability to believe that people could care without an agenda. I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe that not everyone had an angle, that not everyone saw me as a tool, a status symbol, a stepping stone, and maybe Liam deserved that chance. I let out a slow breath, pressing my fingers against my temples. I couldn't keep running forever. I couldn't let one man's betrayal dictate the rest of my life. I wasn't ready for anything more, I knew that. But maybe, just maybe, I could let myself have this one thing. A friendship. A real one. And if Liam was willing to stick around despite everything, despite my walls, despite my doubts, then maybe I could meet him halfway. Work kept me busy, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't mind. The whirlwind of photo shoots, castings, and events became my routine again, but this time, it didn't feel as suffocating. Maybe it was because I had something else, someone else, outside of work. Liam. Our friendship had settled into something easy, something I hadn't realized I missed. We didn't see each other often outside of work, our schedules made sure of that, but when we did, it was effortless. A coffee here, a late-night walk after an event, casual texts that made me laugh when I least expected it. It was nice, it was fun, and it terrified me, because I hadn't felt like this in a long time. Like I could breathe around someone, like I could say anything without overthinking. I didn't let myself analyze it too much. I just let it happen. But then, she called. I was in the middle of getting ready for bed when my phone vibrated on the nightstand. A number I didn't recognize. I hesitated before answering. Hello? Silence. And then a hesitant voice. Hey, I know this is weird, but please don't hang up. I need to talk to you. I frowned, gripping the phone tighter. Who is this? A pause. Then, my name is Julia. A deep breath. I'm the girl you saw with Marco that night. Everything inside me froze. For a moment, I thought about hanging up. Why now? What does she want? But something in her voice, nervous, almost apologetic, made me stay. What do you want? My voice was sharp, defensive. I know I have no right to ask you for anything, she rushed out. But I need to talk to you, in person, please. I clenched my jaw. Why would I want to see you? Because, she hesitated, I think you should know the truth about Marco. My stomach twisted. I had told myself I was done with him, that I didn't care anymore, that I had moved on. But something inside me whispered that this wasn't just about me. Fine, I muttered before I could change my mind. Tomorrow, afternoon, Cafe Delano. Thank you, she said, almost like she hadn't expected me to agree. I hung up without another word. The next day, I arrived early, mostly to convince myself that this wasn't a mistake. The cafe was quiet, tucked away from the usual crowded places I frequented. I picked a corner table, my fingers tapping anxiously against my cup. And then she walked in. She was beautiful. Of course she was. Long legs, perfect skin, the kind of effortless grace that only a model could have. But there was something else too, something tired in her eyes, something hesitant in the way she approached. Hey, she said softly, sliding into the seat across from me. I didn't say anything. I just raised an eyebrow, waiting. She swallowed hard, folding her hands together. I don't know how to start this. Try the truth, I said coldly. She flinched but nodded. Okay. The truth. A pause. Marco and I weren't what you think we were. I scoffed. You're seriously trying to tell me you weren't sleeping with my boyfriend? Her face reddened, but she shook her head. That's not what I mean. I didn't know about you. That threw me. I narrowed my eyes. What? She exhaled shakily. He never told me he was in a relationship, ever. And I swear, if I had known, I would have never... She stopped herself, biting her lip. I didn't know, okay? And I know that doesn't make it better, but... I stared at her, my mind racing. You expect me to believe that? I asked. She nodded. I do. Because I'm not the only one. My stomach clenched. What does that mean? Julia hesitated, then pulled out her phone, scrolling through messages before turning the screen toward me. I read the texts in silence. You have potential, Julia. I can help you get where you want to be. Work with me and you'll go far. Trust me, I know how to make people stars. Look at my name. She was unknown before we worked together. Now, she's unstoppable. A cold wave washed over me. He used me, not just emotionally, not just as a stepping stone in his own career. He marketed me. He sold my name, my success, as proof of his ability to make other models famous. And worse, he had done it while lying about me entirely. You weren't the only one, Julia said quietly. I've spoken to 2 others, both models. Both promised the same thing. She exhaled. I think there are more. I couldn't breathe. This was worse than I thought. So what? He just finds girls and convinces them he can turn them into stars? I asked, my voice cold. Julia nodded. And it works, because he uses you as proof. I felt sick. Why are you telling me this? I finally asked, her hands curled into fists on the table. Because I hate that he used me, and I hate that he used you to do it. She met my gaze, her expression fierce now. I wanted to say I'm sorry, even though I didn't know, even though I never meant to hurt you. I did, and I needed to own that. I looked at her for a long moment, my emotions tangled into something unreadable. I wanted to hate her. I wanted to blame her. But now, sitting here, hearing the truth, I knew Marco was the only one responsible for this. And suddenly, I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt rage. Not toward Julia, not toward the other girls. Toward him. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling sharply. He's going to pay for this. Julia gave me a small, knowing smile. I was hoping you'd say that. Liam noticed immediately. The moment I sat down across from him, he tilted his head slightly, studying me with the sharp focus I'd come to recognize. You're quiet, he said. I forced a smile, stirring my coffee absently. Just tired. He didn't buy it. You're lying. His voice was firm, no room for escape. Something's wrong. I let out a breath, keeping my eyes on the swirling liquid in my cup. It's nothing. Liam exhaled sharply, leaning forward. No, I know you, and this isn't just nothing. You're acting weird like you're not even here. So either you tell me what's going on, or I'm dragging it out of you. A lump formed in my throat. I squeezed my fingers together under the table. I wanted to keep it to myself, to push it down, pretend like I wasn't still unraveling from that conversation with Julia. But Liam wasn't going to let me do that. And maybe I didn't want to be alone with this. So I told him. At first, I kept my voice steady, recounting the call, the meeting, the things Marco had been doing behind my back. How he had used me, not just personally, but professionally. How he had manipulated and deceived other women, selling my success like it was his to give. I made it almost to the end before my voice cracked, before the first tear slipped down my cheek. Liam's expression hardened, his jaw tightening, but he didn't interrupt. He didn't try to make me stop. He just listened. And when the dam finally broke, when the tears came faster and I could barely speak past them, he reached across the table and took my hand. No hesitation, no awkwardness, just warmth. Steady, grounding warmth. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to pull myself together, but it was too much. I had spent so long being strong, pretending like I was fine, like I could handle it all alone. But now I didn't have to. Liam didn't tell me it was okay. He didn't try to minimize it. He just held my hand, his thumb brushing over my knuckles, silent and there. It was the safest I had felt in a long time. After what felt like forever, I finally managed a shaky breath, wiping at my face. God, I muttered, laughing weakly. I must look like a mess. Liam smirked slightly, but there was nothing teasing in his voice. Still prettier than half the people in this cafe. A watery laugh escaped me despite everything. Flatterer. His expression softened. I mean it. For a moment, we just sat there, my hand still in his. I knew I should pull away, that I probably should have done it minutes ago, but I didn't want to. I didn't need to. And then, Liam did something I hadn't expected. His eyes darkened, sharp and calculating in a way I rarely saw. We should destroy him. I blinked. What? Marco, he said, his grip on my hand tightening just slightly. That asshole has been getting away with this for too long. He's hurt you. He's hurt other women, and he's still out there, probably looking for his next target. I swallowed hard. Liam, no, he cut me off. Listen to me. He thinks he's untouchable, that no one's going to say anything, that his secrets are safe, that he can keep using people and walking away without consequences. His jaw clenched. He's wrong. I stared at him, my pulse quickening. What are you saying? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Liam leaned in slightly, his eyes burning with something fierce, something dangerous. I'm saying we expose him. My heart stuttered. He kept going. We take every piece of evidence, your story, Julia's, the other girls, and we put it out there. We don't let him keep doing this. We make sure everyone sees exactly what kind of person he is. My breath caught. You think that'll work? Liam gave me a look. You're one of the most influential models in the industry. If you speak up, people will listen. They'll believe you. And when they see he's been preying on other women, they won't stay silent. I felt like I couldn't breathe. It was reckless. It was bold. It was dangerous. But it was right. I had spent so long feeling powerless, like I was just supposed to accept what happened to me. But I wasn't powerless. Not anymore. A slow, cold determination settled in my chest. I met Liam's gaze, my grip tightening around his. Let's do it. He nodded once, firm and unwavering. And together, we burned Marco's world to the ground. It didn't take long. One post, one single statement on my social media. That's all it took to set everything in motion. I didn't hold back. I told the truth, the entire truth. How Marco had used me, how he had manipulated other women, how he had dangled false promises in front of them like bait. And then the others came forward. Julia posted, then another girl, then another. Screenshots, messages, stories, evidence piled up faster than I could have imagined. Within hours, Marco's name was trending, for all the wrong reasons. His brand dropped him. His partnerships dissolved. Major designers who had once worked with him severed all ties. Agencies blacklisted him. And the hate? It was relentless. People weren't just angry. They were furious. Everything he had built, everything he had manipulated his way into, collapsed beneath him. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel anything for him. But I did feel something else. Relief. For the first time since this nightmare started, I felt free. And when I turned to Liam, when I saw the way he looked at me, not with pity, not with hesitation, but with pride, I knew I had never been alone in this fight, and I never would be again. I never expected to fall for him. Not really. Even after everything, after the late-night talks, the quiet moments, the way he had stood by my side when I thought I had no one, I had convinced myself that we were just friends, that what we had was safe, uncomplicated, but feelings don't care about logic. They creep in, slow and quiet, until one day you realize that the way your heart skips a beat when he texts you isn't normal, that the warmth you feel when he smiles at you isn't just appreciation, that when he touches you, light, casual, barely there, you want to lean in instead of pulling away. It hit me all at once. I was falling. No, I had already fallen, and I didn't know if I was ready for that. But Liam did. It happened one evening, after a long day of work. I was exhausted, my body aching from back-to-back shoots, but when I checked my phone, there was a message waiting for me. Liam, you free tonight? I hesitated for half a second before replying. Me, depends. Free for what? Liam, come outside and find out. My heart jumped. When I stepped out of my apartment, he was waiting by his car, hands in his pockets, a small, knowing smile on his lips. Going somewhere? I asked, raising an eyebrow. He shrugged. Thought you could use a break. I didn't argue. We drove for a while, the city lights flashing by, soft music playing in the background. I didn't ask where we were going. I trusted him. Eventually, we stopped at a quiet overlook, the city sprawling below us in glittering lights. The air was crisp, fresh, and for a moment we just stood there, side by side, soaking it in. Then Liam turned to me. His expression was different, serious, a little nervous. I've been thinking, he said slowly. About us. My breath caught. He rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly looking almost shy. I know you've been through hell, he continued, and I know the last thing you probably want is to jump into something new. But his eyes met mine, steady, warm. I like you. More than I should, probably. And I don't want to pretend I don't. I stared at him, my heart pounding. So, he exhaled, shaking his head like he was frustrated with himself. I guess what I'm trying to say is, would you let me be the guy who treats you right? No pressure, no expectations, just us, for real. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until I let out a shaky laugh. "That was very close to a confession, Carter," I teased, though my voice was softer than usual. His lips twitched. "Yeah, well, I was going for charming. Did it work?" I looked at him, the man who had stood by me, who had never once made me feel like I had to prove my worth. And for the first time in forever, I didn't feel afraid. I felt safe. I smiled. "Yeah," I murmured. "It did." And when he kissed me, gentle, patient, right, I knew this wasn't like before. This wasn't something built on lies, on manipulation, on an agenda. This was real. And this time, I wasn't afraid to fall. Looking back now, I realize how much I've changed. There was a time when I thought love was about sacrifice, about giving so much of yourself that you had nothing left. That was what Marco had made me believe. That love was a transaction, a game, something that could be taken away when it was no longer useful. But that wasn't love. Love was standing on a rooftop at midnight, talking about nothing and everything with someone who actually listened. Love was laughter in the middle of chaos, a hand reaching for mine without hesitation. Love was someone choosing me, not for my success, not for my connections, but just because I was me. And love was knowing that, for the first time in my life, I didn't have to be strong alone. Liam had taught me that, and I was never going back.